Hi, everybody, and good evening. Welcome to the Finding You podcast. I am Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, April 21st, 2026. I'm looking forward to tonight's topic. I gathered a list of topics from listeners. They sent them in per my last request. So at the end of tonight's episode, I'll let you know of the several episodes that I have planned going forward. But the first one that I wanted to talk about that was suggested to me was this idea of overworking and overfunctioning, and how so many of us who identify as codependent or anxious can relate to this topic, can relate to how we get stuck in patterns of overfunctioning, of doing more than our share, of feeling resentful, and tinged with a sense of self-righteousness. So I'll talk about that again from my own personal experience, both as a therapist and a person, as we go along. Before that, let's talk about the housekeeping items. If you don't know already, we have launched the Finding You Inner Circle. This is a subscription to the podcast, so you get access to the live episodes. Also, to content that is not available to the public each month, a couple of episodes and posts that are not available to the public. So if you're interested in that, contact us at our email or go to our website portal. If you're an alumni, you are automatically subscribed to it. So welcome to the Finding You Inner Circle if that's you. My 3 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, The Audacity to Be You, and most recently, my co-authored book, Stay in the Room, is available on Amazon. And soon the Stay in the Room will be available on audiobook, but right now it's just available on Kindle and, of course, the print version. So we're very excited about its launch, and we look forward to a wonderful book tour this summer. If you're interested in a deep dive, if you're interested in doing your own work, and you want to, in my estimation, get weeks, months of therapy in a short period of time, the Finding You Intensive is that offering. It's a 5-day, 7-person, 2-therapist experience that feels incredibly safe. That the intensity of it isn't necessarily that it's overwhelming or intimidating. In fact, quite the opposite. In fact, what you'll find inevitably in your participation is that it's the safest place you've ever been and felt. You end up talking about things that you had no idea that you would or wanted to talk about, because that's how safe it feels in the way that we run these things. So May 13th is that offering. There are a couple of spots left. If you're interested, go to our website portal or email us at our email address. For all other Finding You inquiries, intensives, private intensives for couples, for families, you can email us or go to our website portal. Once a month, we have a support group for the alumni of our program. That's on the 3rd Wednesday of each month. May 20th will be that offering. If you're interested, email us and we'll be happy to give you the link and have you register. If you're looking for a coach or a therapist who works within this model, again, go to our website. You can look at our many coaches and therapists. And we've just brought on a new therapist who specializes in ketamine and psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, who works out of Oregon. So she is welcoming people to that location, and some of that can also be in Utah because she has dual licensing. So if you're interested in that, contact us through our portal or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. Would love to hear from you. If you would like a workshop, I'll be teaching, reteaching really, the Audacity to Be You workshop this summer at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, the Hudson Valley, with my daughter Emma. That's July 12th through 17th, a very affordable program. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit more than listening to a lecture or reading or listening to the podcast, but you're not quite able or ready to go to an intensive, this is a kind of a middle ground workshop, a 5-day workshop, about $500 for the 5 days, plus whatever you find for lodging. July 12th through 17th at the Omega Institute. Go to eomega.org, click on the workshops tab, and then the Audacity to Be You. We'll be teaching the same workshop at the Art of Living Retreat Center in North Carolina. That's September 27th through October 2nd. My daughter Emma and I will be presenting this same workshop. So if the timing or the geography works better for you, you can go to our North Carolina workshop, and we look forward to that. All right, with that housekeeping, let's get into tonight's topic. When I was younger, I wrote these slides in preparation, and I wrote here when I was a young therapist, but frankly, I thought about this idea long before I became a therapist, long before I went to college. I was always curious about why people didn't do the thing that presented itself as the most obvious, healthy, the kind of the path that maybe the consensus would agree is the most evolved way to behave in a certain moment. I learned about skills from a young age. I was in therapy actually in elementary school, and in family therapy throughout elementary school and middle school and high school. There were several opportunities to be in therapy. So we learned things like I feel statements and healthy communication skills and training. But what fascinated me was, even though in a regulated self environment like a therapy session, people would agree on the value of, for example, using such skills. But when it came time to use them in the heat of the moment, there was so much aversion to using them. So for me, early on, it was that question of why. It's fairly easy to kind of learn the what the general knowledge in psychology and relationship psychology teaches us, and to present that to people. But what fascinates me is our resistance, why it's so difficult. So in that vein, in that thought, I wanted to speak to you about overfunctioning and overworking, and really the idea of perfectionism. And many of you might identify with overworking and overfunctioning in terms of perfectionism. So I want to talk about how all of us listening probably have some sense of the lack of balance, the unhealth, the problematic nature of judging ourselves only in terms of pass or fail, all or nothing, perfection or failure. But at the same time, we find ourselves compulsively acting out this kind of behavior. So why? What does it serve? How can we look at it differently than just through the eyes of, or the lens of, should and should not? So I wrote, when I was a young therapist, I wasn't interested in what people ought to do, those things that were thought to be the healthy thing. What I was interested in was why people didn't do the obvious. So for me, it goes back to that idea that when we find a symptom, and it takes some kind of capacity, some kind of safety, some kind of awareness, which is in a sense a form of safety, for us to regard our symptoms and the symptoms of the people that we love with curiosity instead of reflexive judgment. But if we can not react, if we can slow down and take a moment to listen to what the symptom is trying to tell us, in other words, the way that I say it in The Journey of the Heroic Parent is follow the trail of crumbs home to the original wound or injury, we can then offer it healing and attention and warmth and compassion. So again, tonight, it's not about judging. The biggest mistake that we could probably make on this topic would be to be judgmental or perfectionistic about our perfectionism, about this process that so many of us find ourselves in so often. Bowlby, the father of attachment theory, suggested in his teachings that the capacity for productive engagement with the world depends on the security of one's attachment base, not the relentlessness of our striving, So when we do therapy, when I teach about psychology and relationships and parenting and coupleship, it's not about doing something. You can't sort of circumvent the process and short circuit the process by just learning to do and behave in a certain way. Because inevitably, without digging into the root, a behavior change will only be in the service of the same psychology, the same mental health that is always present. I do believe that skills and tools can be facilitating influences on us, catalysts, if you will, for this kind of fundamental transformation. But I don't think in and of themselves they work. In fact, I have numberless examples from my career and personal life where somebody asks for, begs for, presses me for some kind of skill, some kind of approach to a certain situation or conversation. And then when I offer an approach, some words that they might consider using in such a situation, they often respond with resistance that's tied to, like I said, their psychology, their level of consciousness, of awareness, of relationship health. In fact, the more specific I get, the more resistance I get. The more theoretical and abstract and big picture I get, which is my preference at this point, the more people find difficulty in finding how it applies to them. But for me, that more abstract or big picture really does get to the heart of the issue. So what Bowlby is saying here, what he's teaching here, is that the fundamental attachment that we carry around inside of us, that is simply understood as our nervous system, which is the result of our interaction with our environment and the big people that raised us. And if we're adults, that nervous system left over from our attachment experience is something that we can work on in psychotherapy, that the therapist and therapy itself becomes the parent that we did not have and the childhood that we did not have. And that exposure, repeated exposure over really a significant period of time begins to change in us. But we want quick fixes. We want solutions. We are all the victim, so to speak, of Western philosophy and culture, which thinks that the best way to understand any kind of phenomenon is to separate it out into its smallest parts. But we do understand from philosophy also that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, that taking something out of its context doesn't necessarily offer any insight. I remember when my wife was struggling with a significant conversation with somebody in her life, somebody in her family of origin. And in doing so, she sought the advice of her therapist, which also happens to be my therapist. And after several exchanges with our therapist about what she might say, each offering, each suggestion, she found a problem with it, didn't quite fit for her. She eventually realized that she had to find her own words. Keeping in mind what the general task was, she had to find her own words. Remember, if you change your behavior, this is so true for all of us. If you're in a marriage, if you're in a relationship with children, if you don't change your level of consciousness, then doesn't matter what you say, the energy that's exchanged in that exchange will be the other thing. So you can use a perfect I feel statement. Perfect I feel statement. Believe me, I know that as well as anybody. You can use a perfectly crafted I feel statement. But if you haven't shifted and changed your base, the fundamental way of thinking, of being with another person, the energy that gets communicated is that energy. I was thinking about it this week and thinking about shoulds and shouldn'ts so often. This happens to me all the time, whether it be my books, these podcasts, people participating in therapy with me. They'll come to me having remembered something that I said, but instead of directly quoting the idea, they'll come back with a should. I heard you say on the podcast that I should. I read in your book that we should. Last week in therapy, you told me that I should. And I work as diligently as I can to never think, let alone use that word, not even think in terms of should. But our brains, because we're so confronted by our own fear, by the uncertainty of life, the tenuousness of life, the ambiguity of life, we want things to be boiled down to something simply like should and should not. I believe that's what happens to most religions. I talked about this in my new book, Stay in the Room, that your religion is only as good as your mental health, because it doesn't matter who you are. If you're listening to the greatest teacher, whoever you see as the mouthpiece for your higher power or your higher power themselves, if you listen to them and you still live and operate in the should mindset, that there's a right way to do it, a good way to do it, and that's the thing, you will translate any spiritual practice into shoulds and should nots, lists of commandments, lists of ought and ought not to, have to and must. So we talk about at Finding You a different kind of base, a different kind of way of operating and thinking. And that's really important when we talk about perfectionism, because perfectionism is replete with shoulds. It is guarded very, very vigorously. with shoulds and shoulds, thou shalt and thou shalt nots. This psychology that I'm talking about tonight is a being thing, not a doing thing. Thus, advice on what to do may be misleading. Instead of do this or that, we say, keep going. Over time, you will change, and then you will know, you will do, what you will do will come from a deeper place, less manipulative, less contrived, more authentic. Skills and tools are more like examples of how things would look if offered from a new base, a new level of consciousness. This is not about what to do. This is about who you are. And because we were not taught to understand, to lean into who we are, because we were taught there was a right way to even be, let alone do, we have so little access to who we are. We can't see it. It's largely unconscious. So psychotherapy, one way or another, just like our Finding You intensives, is sitting with a non-judgmental, compassionate other so that we drop the defense. Not because we should drop the defense, but because we can drop the defense. Because we don't need it anymore. Because defenses are only required when we feel threatened. And when we feel safe, we don't feel threatened. So the change is fundamental. And then, yes, skills and tools then can be offered in a different way. Like you might say it this way. This is what it would look like. So many times when I'm doing psychotherapy, I'll tell somebody my reaction. And here's the rub. This is a great example. And part of what I'm saying by offering my example, my reaction to a certain situation, dynamic, experience, story that the person tells me, is not to suggest that my reaction is the right reaction, the way that one should react. But I just want to offer that my reaction is different. So that was once a must or a given, what was once the right way to think or react to something, now is just a reaction, a thought. It changes from being the right way to one way. And so the world is allowed to become one of, as my therapist says, noticeable constructions. That means just possibilities. But so often, if I insert my reaction and my thought about a certain story or dynamic, somebody will hear me say, that's the way you should feel. That's the way you should react. And it is it's like the should, this imperative, this pressure to be a certain way and to do a certain thing is the shift. And in a way it is. It's the shift from, as Freud called it, unconscious obligations, these are the shoulds, to what he described as freedom. Freedom to be yourself. From the analytic thinkers, James Hollis, a psychoanalyst, a Jungian psychoanalyst, suggested that what we call our life is often a defense against our life. In other words, he said in another place, the greatest obstacle to what you want is who you have become up to this point. You are a set of adaptations, of ways of dealing with your life, right? In therapy, you learn, well, yes, you do that because at one point that served you to keep you safe. At one point, that behavior, that adaptation was necessary for your survival. But now, today, in this situation, whatever that situation might be, now it has outlasted its function, its usefulness. But to get rid of the old adaptations, the old ways of operating, can be absolutely terrifying because our body tells us. This is all of us. This is me. And I like to say this. This is all the therapists that you know. To get rid of the adaptation, the symptom, the old way of operating is asking us to confront something terrifying. something unsafe, something uncomfortable, something threatening. So we build a sense of safety through the relationship with our therapist in this case, right? Where our nervous system was not adequately developed because our parents didn't have it to give, because their parents didn't have it to give, and so on and so on. Because our nervous systems were inadequate to the task of facing life's challenges and storms, we have to go back and deal with this fact. I have it too. I like to say every therapist that you know struggles with this, because the ones that don't will tell you how hard one that is for them. How much blood, sweat, and tears it took to get to that point. And the ones who say they've never had a problem with these old adaptations, with the struggle of getting rid of the symptoms because of how terrifying it can be, the ones who say that they've never had problems and can't relate, just haven't done the work. So the defense, the barrier, the thing that gets in the way is who we have become up to this point. Hollis in this is saying that the busy, managed, productive life can precisely be the thing standing between a person and their actual existence. All the things that we do, all the activities we engage in, all of our projects, in this way can be understood as a defense against sitting quietly with ourselves. As my therapist likes to suggest often on our Friday sessions, I hope you can go home this weekend and just watch the paint dry and drool and get potato chips all over yourself. And what she's saying is, I hope you can sit with yourself, sit with the quiet, do nothing, except for the potato chips, of course. Do nothing. And let the silence be your teacher and see what comes up. People need to feel safe. Your children, your spouses need to feel safe. Now, that doesn't mean that you tolerate everything that everybody does to you without complaint. It's just a principle. People need to feel safe. They need enough safety so that the stakes are not so great, not as great as they were when they were a child. They need safety because in asking somebody to share, for example, their feelings about something, you're asking them to engage in a process that as a child, in many cases, was absolutely unacceptable, unimportant, and would be dismissed out of hand. Just last night, I was talking to my wife about this, and I fell into this. Just last night. There was some support that she wanted with a conversation with somebody, and I was exhausted from my day. And instead of owning that exhaustion, I was tempted to overfunction, right? To show up because she needed me. Because I can't let somebody down who needs me. That causes me excruciating fear and pain. The fear being that I will be unlovable and not be valuable. The pain being the belief that there's nothing intrinsically valuable about me except for what I can offer others. So anyway, she asked me for something to help her. And I, of course, instead of owning my exhaustion and saying, I don't want to do this, I can't do this, I tried to sell her on why it would be good for her to do it. And she said very calmly, she said, please don't try to convince me that your idea is the right idea. If you can't do it, you can just say it. And she was gentle enough about it, matching what kind of safety I needed, that I was able to say, reluctantly, barely, I was able to say, yeah, I don't want to do it. And then I had to tolerate the bodily discomfort that comes from betraying the script from my family of origin, you see? And that was just last night. And it was small, and it was an event that was almost a non-event. It was so small. But because of my work, my sensitivity, I could see it, I could feel it, but I couldn't avoid falling back in to the same hole that I did as a child. Carl Jung said, the greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. So the doing, the perfectionism, the working, even therapy sometimes can be this eager clawing to reach the mountaintop. And no matter how many times I say this, I can fall into this too. In fact, I fall into it over and over again, convincing myself over and over again that I have transcended the issue at hand. But now, I would say in the past few years, I'm learning in a way that I didn't before, about myself, what it means to be a horrible, rotten self, what it means to be a human self. The problems of life are fundamentally insoluble, most of them. And as a father and a husband, I know how hard it is to sit with another person's unsolvable problems. As a therapist, I know what it's like to sit with unsolvable problems. It's overwhelming, threatening, scary, unsettling, dysregulating. But I know with another, with somebody who can hold space for me, like my therapist, I can bear it. And like I said, the strange thing about children and patients, clients that is that the more capably we listen to our children or to our clients, over time, the better able they are to listen to themselves, to be who they are. There's a line in the Bob Dylan movie from a Bob Dylan song, I believe it's from the song Maggie's Farm, if I'm not mistaken, where he said, everybody wants me to be just like them. Last night I was thinking and sensing that in my life about how much pressure there is from so many sides that people want me to be and think like them. And how my temptation is to isolate, to retreat, to run away. And in some ways, I do need to protect my energy, protect myself from people who would impose on me their idea of the way that I should be. But through psychotherapy, a significant amount of it, if you've heard me speak before, I'm able to go out there. I'm able to see people. I'm able to resist that energy, to be just like them and stay connected to them at the same time. I talk about this a lot, that people think of psychotherapy as something that we do so that eventually, if we work hard enough and do enough of the right things, that we will be beyond reproach, beyond criticism, especially with children. Knowing how much, especially when we wake up, knowing how much we've dented and bruised our children, I think that's probably the place, at least for me and my clients, that I've seen the most energy in this area. If I can just get it right, can I make it up? How can I make it up to my child? And yes, I am a huge fan of apologizing, of making amends. That's part of the journey. But ultimately, it is to learn to accept ourselves as we are. Not because that will lead to a lack of accountability and anarchy in our lives, but because unless we accept who we are, we'll never deal with it. We'll convince ourselves that we're something else. That's why when somebody brings a kind of a core issue that they want to work on with me, what I say to them, you know, you're here right now, you're at point A, and you want to get to point C. But there's something in between A and C. There's a B, and that is accepting and loving yourself as you are. In fact, in my experience, that's really the only deep way to change. It is a wonderful paradox. Carl Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Overwork makes self-acceptance unnecessary. There's always more to do before you've earned rest. There's, again, I live in Utah, and there's a religious culture here that is absolutely replete with this idea of overworking, of overfunctioning. They would tell you their dogma is not that way. They would tell you that it is through grace of the higher power that we're made whole. But the culture doesn't look and feel and taste that way. The culture looks like you have to be good. Wear your Sunday best. Dress up. Look your finest. And don't come talking about your problems and your struggle and your doubts. Come talking about what you've done good, what you've done well, how you are good. In the book East of Eden, which I absolutely loved, Steinbeck wrote, "And now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good." Not a huge fan of the word good there, but in contrast to perfect, it's a huge improvement. And in Al-Anon, it's progress over perfection. I read a quote just yesterday that said, how can you judge yourself as farther behind or further ahead on a path that only you can take? Who are you measuring yourself against? Because your path is your path and nobody else's. You see, this judgment that we have all internalized from our parents, we think will keep us safe. And at times in our life, it does serve that function. But ultimately, it makes our lives smaller. It makes our love smaller. It shrinks our heart. And we come to believe that the things that are happening to us from the outside are the things that are determining our happiness or not. Instead of realizing that the thing that we all must someday come to terms with, which is nobody did it to us on purpose. In fact, I might even say that there's no way not to have it done to you. But you were dented and bruised as a child. Your parents' anger, frustration, disappointment, anxiety, especially anxiety that they didn't own, that they didn't know about, impacted your body with the idea that something is wrong with you. It was a sense of anxiety from your parents that you got. And the only way that you could be good was to continue to work, overfunction, give people what they want at the cost of what you need. Become who people need you to be. This is not a gender thing, too. I hear so much in the self-help world about how this kind of psychology applies to women. Men don't have the same kind of pressure. And that's just not true. They have a much different kind of pressure. In our culture and in most culture, there are expectations of how a woman or a man or somebody that doesn't fit the binary should be. And anything less than that is absolutely unacceptable. But really, what's being passed on is fear. And really, until we come to terms individually and collectively with our relationship with fear and how it impacts our lives, there'll be no revolution. There'll be no spiritual awakening. There'll be no change because it is fear. Donald Winnicott said, "It's a joy to be hidden and a disaster not to be found." Winnicott's idea applied to the overfunctioning in this way. The overfunctioner is visible everywhere, always active, always busy, always doing, and findable nowhere. Because somebody who's busy doing is not really being. They're not quiet, they're not present. The idea of slowing down to them seems gratuitous, self-indulgent, a waste of time, and surely will not lead to any kind of success that we can recognize. So the over-perfection, the perfectionism, the overworking, the overfunctioning is a really difficult thing to get out of. And maybe the worst thing, at least the most on brand thing that any of us could do, would be to judge our perfectionism, to judge our overfunctioning, to judge our overworking. Overfunctioning can be an adaptation left over from a chaotic, unstable, and painful childhood. If in your childhood you were not vigilant, making sure to assure that things got done, that your safety was assured, then you would have suffered even more pain. So the vigilance, the working, the always being ready was a protection. You had to anticipate the problem before it occurred and act in such a way to prevent it. So it can come from a painful, chaotic, underfunctioning environment for sure, where the only way to even come close to feeling safe would be to stand guard, to be hypervigilant. Or, secondly, overworking can also be a symptom for the narcissistic wound, the wound, of course, of not being seen and loved as you are intrinsically. Overworking can also be a symptom of the narcissistic wound. This is more in the vein of codependency. That is, unless I do my fair share, which will also be over the top, just in case, of course. Unless I do my fair share of the work, you will leave me. I will have no value, and I will be alone. I remember once my wife told me that she would visit her chairperson in college during her training as a therapist. And each visit, she would consult with her favorite professor. She would bring a gift of some kind. And very gently, after a few of these, the therapist, the mentor, simply said to my wife, "It's okay, you don't have to bring the gifts. I'll see you anyway." Which was an incredibly emotional experience for my wife, who was not my wife at the time. She couldn't imagine, neither could I. She couldn't imagine that just her was enough. A lot of people quit therapy because they think that the therapist is like their parents, that the therapist is going to tire, become frustrated with, get exhausted by the client's humanity. I was sharing with somebody, I won't go into the long story, but I started guitar during the pandemic like many people do, and now I've been doing it for 6 years. I can play a few songs. But even this week, I've been working on a song for 3 or 4 weeks that my wife asked me to learn for her, one of her favorite songs. And I'm struggling with it. It's complicated. It's just outside of my skill range. And over the course of the last 5.5, 6 years, I can't tell you how many times I've come to my guitar lesson in tears, humiliated, embarrassed. Not just embarrassed that I couldn't learn, but embarrassed that it came to tears. But luckily, I have an incredible guitar teacher who's also a friend. And he's been able to hold space for me in a really compassionate way. In fact, at one point he said to me, "I'll never tire of your inability to learn something. I've never had the thought," he said, "that you're pathetic like you think you are. But my body tells me if I don't get it and I don't get it quickly, what value do I have?" The only praise I got as a child was my accomplishments, my successes, specifically around learning and academics. So the stakes of failing, and in my case, coming in second, would be the possibility of being left, being abandoned. The nameless dread of being left on the side of the road for dead, so to speak. So the act of the reason I haven't learned guitar, I used to say to my students in my program, I used to say, I don't know how to play guitar because, I want to play guitar. I would tell them I would do anything to play guitar except for practice and take lessons. But that wasn't the thing. That didn't get to the root of it. The reason I didn't do guitar, because I didn't want to do something I was bad at. I become so comfortable at the things that I'm good at that I didn't want to branch out, because being bad at something would definitely result in people not loving me. I conflated, as many people do, praise with love and connection. That's why it's so important, and I'll be talking about this in an upcoming podcast, to separate out praise and affection, praise and connection. So overworking, perfectionism, overfunctioning could come from a place where nobody was looking out for us, so we had to look out for ourselves, and or unless we did more than our share and got it right and we're good, we would be afraid that nobody would pay attention, that nobody would love us. Overfunctioners and overworkers are often riddled with anger and resentment because everyone around them isn't pulling their weight. These overfunctioners and overworkers complain about a dynamic in which they are complicit. They are part of the problem. They are themselves in such a way that getting out of it requires a deep, painful, slow, difficult transformation on their part. But they think it's the people out there that are underfunctioning that are causing it. So our complicit participation in the overfunctioning, underfunctioning has these characteristics often present with it. Chronic resentment toward everybody else's lack of doing, lack of contribution. Feeling not loved because we have to ask our partners or others for something. We want them to be able to see it, to want to do it, to read our minds, to anticipate our needs. And if we have to ask for it, our conscious experience is, if we have to ask for it, then they just don't love us. They really don't care. Guilt and fear versus self-righteousness and resentment. I shared this story not too long ago where I'd had an ankle issue. And one of my chores in the family is to take the dog out for her evening walk and to go potty before bed. So when I had this ankle issue, of course, my daughter and my wife, the daughter that's still left at home and my wife, were taking up the slack. But as my ankle started to heal, there was one night where I could probably do it, probably wouldn't cause any damage. It'd be nice if I didn't have to. So I said to my wife, would you be willing to do the dog tonight before we go to bed? To which she responded, do you really want me to? And then I was dead. And then I was frozen. My first response as a good codependent, overfunctioning person was to say, never mind, I got it. If it's such a burden to you that you have to ask me, after I ask you to do it, you have to ask for a confirmation, do I really want it? Then you must not care or love me. It must be too great of a burden. So I'll just do it. Which is what I said to her, I'll do it. And then she responded with her codependency. And she said, why are you being a victim? I'll do it. Just tell me you really want to. To which I argued, I wouldn't have asked you. And on and on and on. We got into the cycle. And I realized, as she took the dog out, by the way, I realized that if I had just done it, it would have given me some kind of self-satisfaction, a sense of self-righteousness. Look at me, I'm the one who does everything. But also resentment for the other lesser people, of course. And I realized that, honestly, that's a more comfortable sensation in my body to carry than the guilt of her doing it, than the fear that I'm burdening her and therefore she won't love me. So for me, in this one example, which is replicated in numberless examples in my life, I had to be willing to feel the discomfort of the guilt and the fear in my body to grow. And to appease the guilt, to prevent the fear, would be to go back into my pathology, back into my childhood, regress back to an earlier level of development and maturity. So when we feel self-righteous, resentful for everybody else's underfunctioning, we can be curious about that and even suspect that that's because we prefer that position rather than the one who is asking for help, for taking the risk of burdening the people that we love, because the only reason they love us, of course, is because of what we do for them. Manipulating others versus becoming the project yourself. So much of overfunctioning And overworking is manipulation, unconsciously. Trying to control, manipulate other people. Instead of recognizing that the project that I'm talking about tonight during this podcast is our work. Often, this overworking perfectionism is an overdeveloped ego, or really a super ego, where we're succumbing, living according to the shoulds and the shouldn'ts. Remember, I shared this story, analogy, idea, and I want to just say at the outset, because I have many listeners that are atheists and Jewish and Christian and Muslim and all sorts of religions. I don't have a religion that I subscribe to. For me, they're all true in one way or the other. But my background was Christianity. So that's the stories that I have reference to. But I love this quote that I saw a month or so ago. It was supposed to be, I think, in the context of religious doctrine and teachings, but I thought it was really powerful in terms of our overall psychology. And the saying went something like this, that Jesus, in this case, from a Christian perspective, just use your own higher power, Jesus can save you as a sinner, but he can't save you from your self-righteousness. If the task is to be good enough, if the task is to be good, to be right, that will prevent connection. If we do the arduous work of differentiation, the heroic journey, of doing the thing that is uncomfortable, that is foreign to us, become who we are, accept who we are, deal with who we are. If we do that work, we can be freed. But the path leading to the freedom is terrifying, uncomfortable. Usually our complicitness in this overfunctioning, overworking, perfectionistic cycle feels like, I have to do this or it won't get done. I have to do this. I said that to a client recently. It seems like you're interpreting these things as a you have to. Everybody expects me to do it. Nobody cares about my needs. I shouldn't have to ask. It feels better to be right than it does to be a vulnerable self. Last night, when I had to admit that I didn't want to help my wife, it was terrifying, uncomfortable. I felt like crap afterwards for a good hour or two. Intellectually, I knew the puzzle. This is not an intellectual exercise. None of this is. Hardly anything I teach about is intellectually solved. We have to experience it. We have to go through it. Oftentimes, we think, I would never do that. I would reach out. We start to compare, right? Again, that gives us that sense of righteousness. I love what Alan Watts says. I share it often. The meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. And yet everybody rushes around with a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. We want to be told what to do. We want to tell this, what's the right way to live my life? How can I get it perfect? Then nobody can criticize me. Nobody will be angry at me. I'll leave nobody wanting. Except for one, and that is the little person that lives inside of us. Our authentic self gets sacrificed in this perfectionism. I was thinking about this in terms of cleanliness. One of the ways that I've dented my children, of the numerous ways that I've dented them, is around cleanliness. I love a clean and orderly house because it makes me feel calm and regulated. Most people would say not a bad thing, but I will tell you, I have done it at the expense of play, at the expense of healthy child development. I've done it with intensity and anxiety and frustration and rage. And now all my children have a kind of a, not just because of me, my wife is the same as me in this way, they have kind of a strange relationship with cleanliness and order. Doesn't quite make sense in a lot of ways. But I was reading something that Neil deGrasse Tyson said the other day. He was saying having children, think about this symbolically too. Having children and having a clean house are two diametrically opposed projects. And really, it's also true metaphorically. Having children and getting married and having a clean, neat life are two diametrically opposed projects. The relationships that we create with our spouses and with our children are messy, imperfect, human, complicated, nuanced, complex, paradoxical, dialectical, uncertain, all of that. But that's where the growth is. So if you got married, if you had children, it wasn't your conscious desire for these lessons to be taught, but they are inevitable. We have to figure out a relationship. It's about the way we are with ourselves and other people, right? It's not about what you should and should not do. Thou shalt and thou shalt. It's how you are. How you are with yourself, how you are with your feelings, with your own psychology. And that extends to how you are with other people. You see, the goal is not to arrive, not to finish. The goal is to find enough love for our rough, unfinished self. But the ideas put forth here are a kind of aim. They are your work and your project, as I like to call it. It's not about completing the task or perfection. It's about being present on the journey towards wholeness. And when we come up short, which we inevitably will, often, the task then is to love ourselves and honor ourselves, to meet ourselves with curiosity and compassion. Mary Oliver wrote in her beautiful poem, Wild Geese, I think it's called. She said, you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Pascal, a mathematician from the 17th century, once stated in his book, unfinished book called Thoughts, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. I'll end with this. David Hume, a philosopher, early 18th century philosopher, I guess mid-18th century philosopher, talked about this philosophical mistake that we make. He called it the is-ought problem. He says we at times can be quite effective at describing what is. But then we extrapolate from what is to what should be, what ought to be, what ought to happen. And he said there's no necessarily logical connection between what is and what ought to be. But we translate most things into a should. You've all seen memes and cartoons of famous religious leaders and them saying, I saw one just last week of a conversation, hypothetical conversation between the Buddha and Jesus, and they were talking, saying, you know, we tried to teach them, but they just keep making statues. We tried to teach them it was about how to be in this world, and they just keep coming up with rules and laws about what should happen, what should be, instead of learning the way to be. In a famous passage from the New Testament, the teacher looked at the crowd and said, "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." And for 2,000 years, we have been collapsing under the weight of that word, perfect. But the word actually used was teleos, a Greek word rooted in telos, meaning end, purpose, goal, whole, complete, fully grown into the thing you were made to be. The scholars have known about this mistake in translation for centuries. Somewhere in translation, we turned a call toward integration into a demand for flawlessness. And we have been exhausting ourselves ever since, trying to earn what was never meant to be earned. Jung said he'd rather be whole than good. Turns out, so did Jesus. So what's the take home? The task is to become you. And I know that's terrifying. It seems like it will be a disaster. It seems like the world will be a disaster. And it gets a little rough. That's why we call this becoming ourselves in midlife a midlife crisis. Because when the guardrails and the rules are taken away, it looks really messy. But on the other side of it is integration, is acceptance, self-love, self-compassion. And what comes out of that? Love and connection for others, service, understanding that we're all connected and not separate. It's about progress over perfection. How can you be ahead or behind if you're on a path that only you are traveling? Perfect is the enemy of good. I'll say good enough. One skill that you can use that I encourage is to try not to use imperatives. Should, shouldn't, must, mustn't, ought not to, have to, need to. Just try to eradicate those from your language and then see how your thinking adjusts and changes. I don't know what it means when someone uses the word should. I don't know what the context, what the reference is. Typically, I don't share the same reference point, the same context, so it doesn't make sense. Find an empathic other, i.e. therapist, and spend a lot of time with them over a long period of time and watch it change you. Skills and tools can be helpful for this transformation, but they themselves are not the transformation. A skill or a tool this is what it would sound like if, for example. This is one way it might sound if you loved yourself. This is one way it might sound if you love the other. Be gentle with your perfectionism. Judging your perfectionism has not solved anything, has not shifted the base. Your perfectionism is your younger self, longing for love in the only way they know how, longing for safety in the only way they know how to get it. I saw something from Brene Brown recently. She was on Adam Grant's podcast, and she was talking about how she had heard that the analysts call narcissism the terror of being ordinary. And as often happens, I don't like what she was saying. It's sort of true. The terror is not being ordinary. The terror is if I'm ordinary, if I'm not special, I won't be loved. And if I'm not loved, my life will be at best meaningless, and at worst, I'll die. So the terror is not about being ordinary. The terror is death and rejection and aloneness. And what the narcissist, and when I say narcissist, we all have a little bit of that, remember? The ones who qualify for the diagnosis are cemented in their patterns, and they typically are very obvious, but we all have some of it. All of our defenses are narcissistic. All of our defenses are an attempt to not be bad, an effort to be good. What we are afraid of is what we concluded from our childhood, is that if I don't do more than my share, if I don't give to you, even at the cost of me, you won't love me. And if I don't have love, then life has lost its meaning, if not its safety. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. All right, folks, my 3 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, The Audacity to Be You, and Stay in the Room, are available wherever books are sold. If you would like to attend a workshop with me, I'll be at the Omega Institute July 12th through 17th with my daughter Emma, and in North Carolina at the Art of Living Retreat Center in September 27th through October 2nd, again with my daughter. If you want to do a deep dive, if you want to feel what I'm talking about, Finding You Intensives is that opportunity. May 13th is the next one. There are a couple of spots left. June 10th after that. For all other inquiries for couples, families, or private intensives, go to our website or email us. And the next support group will be May 20th. It's the third Wednesday of each month. That'll be May 20th. For a coach or a therapist who can help you with this kind of work, the kind of work that I talk about, go to our website or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. Coming up, This Thursday, I will have an Ask Me Anything episode only for our Inner Circle members. So if you're an Inner Circle member, send in questions in advance. You can send questions anytime to info@findingyouprograms.com. That'll be this Thursday, the 23rd at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Next, I cannot wait to do the broadcast on praise and connection. That'll be Tuesday, April 28th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. After that, these are the topics I got from folks. I'm happy to take topic suggestions from anybody. I'll be doing inner child work on May 5th, specifically in response to some criticism that somebody shared with me that they read about in the media. I'm going to be talking about masculinity redefined on May 12th. I'm going to be talking about self-help ideas. I don't know how many. At first, I was going to give a number, but I don't want to pin myself down to a number. I'm going to be talking about the several self-help ideas that I see that I take issue with. That'll be May 19th. And then I'm going to be talking about logical fallacies and how so many of us want to find an authority that will tell us what to do, that we can advocate the chief responsibility that is ours, which is to live our life. All right, folks. Any questions, any suggestions, any inquiries? info@findingyouprograms.com is our email address. If you ever want copies of these slides, I'm happy to share them. info@findingyouprograms.com. Thanks for joining me this evening. I hope this is a helpful point of contact in your week. For on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thanks for showing up to these and doing your work, because that makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you Thursday night. Those of you Inner Circle folks, or I'll talk to you next week if you're not Inner Circle on Tuesday. Take care. Have a great evening. Talk to you then. Bye-bye.